Um, Hi, everybody. I'm Professor Caitlin Reed. I'm an assistant professor in the Native American Studies Department here at Humboldt State University. And I'm really, really excited to introduce this workshop that we get to hear today. This workshop will focus on block corporate salmon, a campaign to stop the release of genetically engineered salmon into the U.S. market this year. Our main presenter will be Nargis. Did I say your name right, Nargis?
Yeah, it's Nargis.
Great. Okay. She is a California-based organizer with Uprooted and Rising, helping to lead in UNR campaign to block corporate salmon, which calls for a global boycott of genetically engineered salmon, and the UC Divest TMT campaign, which calls for the UC to divest from the proposed 30-meter telescope in sacred Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Nargis comes to UNR and this work as an organizer with the Movement for Palestinian Liberation, and is inspired by this work through the interconnections between the fight for food sovereignty in the US and abroad. And I can see you brought some of your excellent colleagues with you. Nargis, would you mind introducing your colleagues? I only have your bio right in front of me, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, so let me pull up. Yeah, so we have Yasmin and Lehua who are going to be opening up the workshop. Lehua Nani DeFranco is a New York-based Kanaka/Native Hawaiian organizer with Uprooted and Rising, helping to lead both UNR's Block Corporate Salmon campaign and also UC Divest TMT. And Yasmin is also an Uprooted and Rising organizer, helping to lead the Block Corporate Salmon campaign. And yeah, they'll be opening up our presentation.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, so aloha mai kako o lehunua kuinoa he kanaka maoli o ao noho ao maka aina lenape ame Canarsie. So hello everyone, my name is Lehua Nani. I'm a Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian. I'm a guest on Lenape and Canarsie lands, which is also known as Brooklyn, New York. So I just wanted to start with a really simple breathing exercise and a chant to open us into this space. So wherever you are, just sit down comfortable. So we're gonna do 4 breaths, really deep inhales and exhales. We're gonna do one with your head facing forward, one with your head down, one with your head all the way up, and then the last one with your head facing forward. Okay, so inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Last one. Inhale. Exhale. He ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O na mea o na no ea o na mele. He ho mai, he ho mai, he ho mai. Mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O na mea o na no ea o na mele. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O na mea o na no ea o na mele. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai. So I just wanted to ground us into this space. I really want to mahalo our host for having us here. I wanted to offer that chant as it opens us into this space. It's asking our kapuna, our elders, our na'amaku, our ancestors, for the knowledge and the strength to open into a space and to carry on. And especially with this type of work that I know gets very exhausting, but we are all really committed to pushing through it, and we're all committed to this fight. So I'm gonna pass it to Yasmin to give a little bit more information about Uprooted and Rising.
Hi, thank you all again so much for having us, and thank you, Lehanani, for opening up the space. So yeah, I would love to start with a quick summary of what UNR does and how we initially got plugged into all of this work around protecting salmon that so many groups have been engaged with for many years on many levels. And of course, that coastal Native communities and salmon protectors have been doing since time immemorial. So Uprooted and Rising is a network of supermajority Black and Indigenous people and people of color who aim to end higher education support for big food corporations and white supremacy in the food system and direct the energy of our generation towards food sovereignty. And our goals revolve around mobilizing young people to solicit their involvement with the struggle for food sovereignty and work for solutions in their communities. We particularly focus on higher education because we think that it's a strategic way to engage young Black and Brown people to confront these institutions until or unless they end their support for big food and begin to meaningfully address the capitalistic and white supremacist frameworks they operate under that diminish the knowledge of Indigenous communities, Black communities, and communities of color. And higher education has always been a very pervasive force with the power to influence and control popular research and knowledge, and oftentimes can serve as a gatekeeper to opportunities and resources. It plays a huge role in influencing future jobs and future public policy, which of course in theory is not necessarily bad at all and can be really beneficial for society, but it often diverts its attention away from the communities that its students, staff, and faculty represent, and rather as an entity choose to partner with corporations to amplify their goals. So oftentimes it really operates as a sort of business, which is unfortunate because there's so much incredible research and activism that takes place on university campuses, but so many of the projects that receive the majority of the funding at a university are those that generate the most profit. And to sort of summarize our sort of like stance on higher education, or what higher education we really see as doing, is one, it typically buys billions of dollars worth of big food products. Two, it promotes big food brands through contracts, through buildings, named buildings. And three, it funnels students into corporate jobs and uses public resources, in the case of public universities, to develop lucrative technology and intellectual property that is adopted by big food and then passed on to state, national, and foreign policy. So that's kind of a quick summary of UNR. And then we started getting involved in this campaign sort of early October 2019, where we were able to attend a local catch summit with a few other organizations, including Community Alliance for Global Justice, Friends of the Earth, Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. And we learned that Sea Grant universities, which are higher ed institutions that receive federal funds and resources for marine research and education, are actually one of the biggest promoters of genetically engineered salmon, as well as commercial or industrial offshore aquaculture, which rather than promoting ocean conservation efforts, instead puts it at huge ecological risk and endangers our community's health and safety. And so we have wanted and have been trying throughout this time to offer our energy and capacity and the UNR network to really throw our efforts and our weight behind this effort to block genetically engineered salmon and the expansion of industrial aquaculture. So that's kind of a little bit of the context behind that. I am personally very invested in this fight. Oh, also just to introduce myself a little bit more, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that, but my name is Yasmin. I am on Coast Salish and Duwamish land in also known as Seattle. And yeah, so where I come from, I'm Thai. I grew up mostly in Thailand, and I come from a family of farmers and fishers. And genetically engineered salmon and industrial aquaculture are kind of embedded in this really like much broader framework too of this effort to sort of colonize our waters and colonize our oceans and exert privatization and corporate control over this resource that should be accessible to all in a public, considered a public commons. And so I'm really invested in this fight to protect the people who I am in community with, to protect the histories that I come from, to respect the waters that we all take resources from and take care of, and also to pay respect as well to the land and its original stewards, for whom salmon is such a cultural keystone species. And I'll pass it back to Lehuanani first, and then I guess pass it on to Nargis to take charge of the rest of the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, I just called you Nargis. Thank you, Yasmin. So yeah, so a little bit of background on how I got involved in the campaign is actually through Yasmin. I got involved with Uprooted and Rising through the fight to protect Mauna Kea from the desecration of the 30-meter telescope. So the connection for me is that Mauna Kea is our sacred mountain in Hawaii. It's the tallest mountain in the world from the seafloor, and the 30-meter telescope, or the TMT, threatens to desecrate that sacred land right at the summit on the top of Mauna Kea. So it's, you know, the construction of that telescope would cause harm to an already really, really fragile ecosystem. And it also endangers the source of our water from the aquifer that sits right inside of the Mauna. So this is about a 10-year battle that's been happening against TMT. And it really escalated last year when construction was once again approved. And this time an entire nation of protectors of Kia'i really rose up to protect Mauna Kea. So they blocked the access road from construction for almost about a year, and then just came down once COVID hit, and once they got confirmation knowing that the Mauna would be safe. So when I got involved with UNR, it was to assist the students from the University of California. They are currently pressuring their own university to divest from the 30-meter telescope. During one of our meetings, I was talking to Yasmin, and they were telling me about Aquabounty's genetically engineered salmon. And so I felt like I really needed to get involved because of the similarities of how colonization of our sacred places and our sources of food are really being threatened by these corporations and by these different countries. So how salmon is sacred to the salmon people, kalo or taro is sacred to us. It's been threatened by those who want to genetically engineer it as well. But also Mauna Kea represents the source of our creation story. When Papa Earth Mother and Wakea Sky Father came to birth Ho'oho'okulani, and then Ho'oho'okulani and Wakea joined together to birth another child, but it was stillborn. So Papa Earth Mother, she buried it into the ground, and from up that sprouted the kalo plant. And then the second child of Wakea and Ho'oho'okulani was Haloa, the first human. And so he was fed and sustained by his older brother, the kalo. So these creation stories, they are essential to our way of life, to our culture, to our history. And these different corporations that threatened our sacred food and our sacred places, they're also threatening our future. So that was really the connection that settled me into wanting to be a part of this campaign and fight against genetically engineered salmon as a way to support the salmon protectors and the many long fights that they have been dealing with for years and years and years. And so really seeing, when I was at Standing Rock and when I was at Mauna Kea, seeing all the people come together and knowing that, you know, the movements that we have are so incredibly strong. But when we stand in them together, they're just that much stronger. So that makes me just feel that as my kuleana, my responsibility to be here and support this fight to protect our culture and to protect our future. I'm going to be handing it to Nargis, who's going to go more in depth about details about the campaign.
Hey everyone, sorry, I was just connecting to my headphones. Thank you, Lehua and Yasmin. Yeah, my name is Nargis. I'm on staff with Uprooted and Rising, and just a little bit about myself. I have been working with Uprooted and Rising since February of 2020. And the reason I was interested in working with Uprooted and Rising was because I've been organizing around Palestinian liberation for a majority of my undergraduate years, and I found out about Uprooted and Rising at the National Students for Justice in Palestine conference last November, which happened in Minnesota. And I thought that the way that they connected Palestinian liberation to food sovereignty was really beautiful and powerful. So I wanted to I want to reach out to them and see if I could continue to be involved in what they do. And yeah, one of the first things I started doing with Uprooted and Rising was the UC Divest TMT campaign that Lehua mentioned. And that campaign has started around March of this year. And it has become, yeah, just a really powerful group of folks. And yeah, one of my yeah, favorite things about Uprooted and Rising. And yeah, I wanted to begin this presentation by really showing how insidious this issue is with salmon. So I wanted to show you a video that Yasmin and Lehua actually put together, and it really breaks down the issue. And yeah, so the video will cover the corporate stakeholders in this and all the specifics about how this salmon came to be, and the science behind the genetic engineering, and the company behind it. So would I be able to share my screen? Is that cool? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. I will get that set up. Can folks hear the video, by the way?
No, you have to go to share audio too. So like on the little side of screen share, you should be able to drop down and you can hit share audio as well.
I don't see that. Let me.
One other option is that you could end screen share, click on it again, and then when the thing comes up, it'll be right there at the bottom. And you just click, make sure both of those boxes at the bottom are checked. And that'll share your audio as well as your video.
If I put myself unmuted, do y'all hear it now?
Slave labor, or what Scredian likes to call on their website, slave life.
Yeah, you have to be unmuted for us to hear.
Illegal pesticide use and violent land conflicts, including
complaints about that. And out of the time, they don't have to. Sure.
Thanks so much, Buck. Really appreciate that. Okay, so these are the corporate stakeholders. So Skretting and Cargill are going to be, Skretting is the main source of fish feed for genetically engineered salmon, GE Salmon, and Cargill is also producing fish feed for Aqua Bounty salmon. So we're going to talk about how terrible these companies are. Skretting has been linked to an investigation of Brazilian soy suppliers who are accused of illegal deforestation, slave labor, or what Skretting likes to call on their website, slave-like labor, illegal pesticide use, and violent land conflicts, including the illegal use of indigenous lands in the Amazon. Skretting on their website also states that they agree in principle, quote, in principle, but we also think it is important to recognize the difficulty in being certain that all suppliers to our own suppliers operate in a responsible legal way, end quote. So basically what they're saying is, yes, we agree with what you're saying, but we're not going to be held responsible for actually checking and making sure that our suppliers aren't involved in any of these illegal things that they've already been accused and investigated about. So that's great. Cargill is another supplier of soy feed. Cargill has been named as the worst company in the entire world. And as you can see, there's also an image of the Amazon that has been deforested. So Cargill and other feed companies are really heavily invested in the aquaculture industry. Cargill poses soy as the future of fish feed to monopolize the entire industry. And it is even a keystone actor in the Sea Boss initiative, even though it doesn't produce any seafood. And that is the joining together of all these big companies to see how they can move forward in aquaculture, in the in this industry. But that was supposed to be a way for them to kind of like hold them accountable, but they're all sort of just in there together to hype each other up. So Aqua Bounty, which is creating the GE Salmon, they have hired a new marketing staff to create consumer appropriate language, which is basically another word for greenwashing. So that makes sure, that they don't reveal themselves to be the scams that they really are. So their new chief commercial officer is a gentleman named David Melbourne. He was hired last year in June, and he previously worked at Bumblebee for the past 14 years as the senior vice president of consumer marketing, government and industry relations, and corporate responsibility. So with Bumblebee, they have recently pled guilty to price fixing. And this past year, just in June, the Bumblebee president, he's going to prison for leading the price fixing ring. So that is the Big Tuna collaborator scheme with Starkiss and Chicken of the Sea. David Melbourne was there since 2005. And so I don't really feel comfortable with the fact that Aqua Bounty is hiring somebody who most likely was in really close relations and knew about this price fixing since it had been going on for so long. And now he is sort of leading the push towards how they're going to be marketing their GE Salmon to consumers. You can go to the next slide, please.
Cool. So that was kind of our summary around the impacts of aquaculture. That was definitely a lot of information. So I hope that folks will contact us later with any of the questions that you have. I might take a second right now to just plug our Instagram, which is @BlockCorporateSalmon, where you can contact us and message us to ask for questions and resources about any of these pieces. But now we're going to transition into talking more in depth about Aqua Bounty and genetically engineered salmon. And we're running a little bit late right now, so I'm going to try and make this very brief and succinct. But basically, Aqua Bounty has been developing GE Salmon for decades. They have this little joke with themselves where they like to call themselves a 30-year startup, basically. Originally, Aqua Bounty, basically the idea behind genetically engineered salmon was to initially help fish adapt to changing weather conditions by adding this growth hormone, essentially. And so the way that it has evolved now is that Aqua Bounty has basically created genetically engineered salmon that grows twice, that goes at twice the rate of typical salmon. So it takes about 18 months to reach maturity, which is a lot shorter than the typical 2 to 3 years that it takes for salmon to reach maturity. And they basically have done this by combining the DNA of 2 other fish with Atlantic salmon. And so they've taken the growth hormones from Chinook salmon, as well as this basically on and off switch from ocean pout, and combined the 2 in Atlantic salmon to basically make it so that Atlantic salmon has an excess of growth hormones and that the growth hormone switch is always on. And so that's how they can grow so quickly while still consuming less feed. And just thinking about some of the health impacts of this too, there has been research that has been done around excess growth hormones. I mean, this is of course not healthy for the salmon at all, and is super unnatural for the salmon too, but for their intended consumers as well, which is us being their experiments, basically when they release GE salmon to the public. There's been research around an excess of growth hormones, basically creating a responsive chemical within us called insulin-like growth factor, which a lot of research has shown in excess can be cancerous. In addition to that, they make all of these claims basically saying that Aqua Bounty salmon, or Aqua Advantage salmon, as they like to call their Frankenfish, is sustainably raised because it is raised in land-based farms. So they argue that it is safe for the environment, that there are no risks for fish escapes, that they've been developing this technology for a long time, and that there is little risk of failure. Of course, that can't really be the case because genetic engineering is fraught with risks, and it only takes single mutation to really mess up the whole thing. But they argue that even if their fish did escape, that their fish are sterile, though their fish are all female, that their fish are all sterile, and so even if their fish did manage to escape, that they wouldn't be able to breed with wild salmon, which was another concern that was raised by the public and by activists. Again, of course, genetic engineering is not as certain as they describe it to be, and so in the case that fish do escape, there is, of course, the possibility that they would be able to breed with wild salmon. And a lot of the concern there is that they would breed with wild salmon and genetically compromise wild salmon, which would be horribly impactful to Native communities who rely on salmon as a way of life. And so something else as well that Aqua Bounty claims is that they are very transparent in their process, that they do not wish to hide the fact that they are making genetically engineered salmon. However, the way in which they are going about selling the salmon or looking for people to sell the GE salmon to definitely speaks to the opposite being the case. For one example, the places in which they're developing their plants or their land-based fish farms are typically in places where regulations are very low. So they have a processing plant in Canada, as well as they're looking to develop these processing plants in Brazil and Israel that do not have regulations around labeling genetically engineered foods. Their argument for that and not labeling there is basically a political one, where they are saying that if they were to label genetically engineered salmon in those countries where there aren't regulations, they would be claiming that the lack of regulations was a wrong choice for them. And so they basically get out of it by saying, we agree with these lack of regulations and think that they're actually progressive because genetically engineered salmon is quote unquote the same as wild salmon, which it absolutely is not. So their definition of transparency is incredibly loose. They basically say, and Aqua Bounty has the whole webinar on this that they released recently, that if anyone were to come and ask them about genetically engineered salmon or their product, that they would be transparent and tell them about it. Of course, there have been groups that have approached Aqua Bounty in the past that have requested information about the research that they've done and the testing that they've done on genetically engineered salmon, and they have refused to release those things or have skirted releasing those things in the past. And in this process, of course, Aqua Bounty has not at all attempted to communicate with the Native communities that this would most impact and be the biggest risk for. And really their goal is, and this is something that we'll continue to uplift, is they are driven by profit and expansion and privatization. Aqua Bounty owns the genetic code for their genetically engineered salmon. And so another risk that we're thinking of in terms of fish escapes is the fact that because Aqua Bounty owns this DNA, if they were to breed with wild salmon, that they would also, that ownership would then extend to the wild salmon that the Aqua Bounty salmon would be breeding with. And so again, this kind of ties back into corporations seeking to privatize the ocean as a whole, and only centering profit within that goal, and actually being legally obligated to center profit as their goal, not communities, and not people, and not health, and not safety, and not the environment.
Okay, so here's a two reel comment or comic on genetically engineered salmon, the good old Frankenfish. So I just want to repeat to what Yasmin was saying about the fact that we need to point out that Aqua Bounty does not address at all the cultural significance of salmon to Indigenous people. And that the FDA and the environmental impact statements, they don't include cultural nations to the health of humans. It's just like not in there. And we've seen with Standing Rock and the telescope on Mauna Kea that that's never been in their environmental impact statement because they wouldn't be able to move forward because these things are so harmful to these cultures. I think you can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's Aqua Bounty. These are screenshots that I took from their webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that they are just so focused on profit expansion and corporate domination. So what they claim is that 30 years ago, when the person who created genetically engineered salmon, or who created the idea of it and started experimenting, his focus was focused on animal welfare. So the goal was, how do we protect salmon when they enter ocean pens against weather changes so they continue to grow? So what happens when you put farm fish in these pens, and these are pens from Aqua Bounty, from their website, is that depending on the temperature, if it's too cold or too warm, they stop eating. You could say that they go into shock or get depressed, so they stop eating. So I don't really understand how Aqua Bounty can say that you're protecting salmon when you are physically removing them from their homes, changing their DNA, cutting their lifespan in half, denying them their natural life cycle, and refusing to acknowledge all the work Indigenous people have done to actually protect them. So the map here, it shows some states that they are looking to expand into. The next farm that they want to build is going to be 10 times the size of Indiana's farm. So Indiana is farm 2, and they are already planning farms 3, 4, and 5. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, these are their like benchmarks for their quarter. And you can see under 2021 that they want to significantly scale operations and expand at existing production capacity. So other areas that they want to expand into is Brazil, Israel, China, and Argentina. Brazil is definitely going to be the first one. They've already concluded field trials last year. In China, they have approved for field trials and they're preparing the farm there. In Israel, they've identified the site, and then Argentina is the next step where they're going to start these regulatory process. So they're going to be improving the genetics over time with selective breeding and gene editing. They probably won't be doing genetically engineered salmon right away just because the process is so long. But they did say that white fish or shrimp is going to be next. So you know that it's on the horizon and they're already thinking, okay, how can we expand this in the US? How can we expand this across the globe? And what next can we privatize? What next can we own and change the DNA of? So it's not, a lot of people, they like to say that, oh, well, it's just this one thing and we're just approving this one thing. But what you really have to consider, and what a lot of opposing organizations in Canada have expressed, is that you have to think about them at like full capacity of all their facilities, full capacity of production of all their facilities around the world. Next slide, please. So this again is an image of what Yasmin was talking about. Taking the gene from Chinook salmon and the gene from the ocean pout and injecting it into the egg of Atlantic salmon to create GE salmon. So the two salmon that you see there, they're the same age, and it's twice as large. So again, you're cutting its lifespan in half because you're inserting this growth factor that will just force them to grow, so that in 18 months they can, go straight to somebody's plate. So another thing that opposing organizations in Canada have brought up is that a lot of these, or the GE salmon and the non-GE salmon eggs, are actually being produced in the same facility. So they're not just GE salmon producers, they are also interested in farming non-GE salmon fish. So those eggs are being produced in the same facility, which again is another ripe environment for any accidents. If fish eggs get messed up, if for some reason they're shipping out their eggs to another supplier, and they put them in an ocean pen that has other farmed fish, or they put them someplace where there are wild salmon, and the crossbreeding and the detrimental health that's going to be produced out of that. Aqua Bounty also has a history of repeated violations of regulations in Panama. They operated without the necessary permits concerning the use of water and pollution of the local environment. So they already have this pretty fraught history of not following the rules. Next slide, please. Oh, there's another great comic. So you see this Frankenstein's monster looking at another Frankenstein's monster, Frankenfish. And he's saying, how do I know if it's natural or genetically modified Frankenfish? So this brings up the issue of labeling. Aqua Bounty admits transparency has been strongly advised to them from many of their consultants. And they say it in a very, in this way that's sort of like, we know that we have to be transparent because it'll, get us in with the people. But they still refuse to be upfront about the origins of GE salmon to the public unless required by law. So they're really not motivated to put labeling very clearly on their products unless they have to. The FDA requires Aqua Bounty to label their salmon in the US, but labeling can be anything from a phone number to a barcode. And how many of us are going to the grocery store looking at, you know, a box or a container of something and, oh, I'm going to call this phone number right now while I'm at the grocery store, or I'm going to scan this barcode. I honestly don't even know how to do a barcode scan, the GE code thing on my phone. So I would totally be lost. I would never even think of that. In Canada, the Canadian regulatory authorities, they're just allowing Canadians to buy GE salmon without the knowledge that it's been genetically modified. So they're not requiring any labeling. Aqua Bounty insists on letting consumers choose whether or not they want to consume GE salmon, but they still won't voluntarily label their salmon in stores. The president of Aqua Bounty, she is super opposed to labeling their salmon, and she determines the progressiveness of countries based on their regulatory practices around GMO products. So, you know, what she'll say is that, well, Canada they're super progressive. The US is backwards, which is not untrue. Brazil is progressive. The EU is backwards. Like, this is how she's choosing, and she's using the word progressive because she knows the influence that has on people when people automatically think of. Which again goes to this push of marketing for greenwashing. You know, these people that they're hiring to help them have the perfect greenwashing language there. So she was also questioned, the president of Aqua Bounty, she was also questioned, you know, if for some reason Canada did start requiring labeling, like, how would you feel about that? And she would say, I would only support the Canadian regulatory authorities who said that she didn't have to do labeling, as if they're a political party or something. And if they change their position, then we will comply, but we are not going to say that their approach was wrong because we don't believe that. So again, she's just really pushing the fact that she does not want to have to label because she knows that people are not going to buy her products if it has GE on the product. But also, what they're going to do to bypass labeling is selling to restaurants, industrial smokers. She believes that COVID will help their cause because people will see, you know, the cure to COVID being part of biotechnology, so they'll be more used to this idea. But also COVID has hurt restaurants, so she's not able to sell restaurants as much salmon. But again, you can kind of go to the back end of it and contact grocery stores and industrial smokers. So through this, Aqua Bounty is perpetuating the colonization of food, of nature, animals, and indigenous culture. And this again leads to the further erasure of indigenous people, which is what they want because that's opposition that they will just never be able to answer to. Next slide, please. We're almost done. So again, we're uplifting the fact that indigenous knowledge is food sovereignty. So we have a photo here of the Run for Salmon. Again, talking about the fact that indigenous people have been doing this work for years, and the Run for Salmon is a way to uplift and send prayers to encourage their salmon to return back to their sacred waters. The genetic altering of the salmon is just another diversion, moving away from the priority of returning the salmon to their original waters. So instead, they're focusing to violate and alter the genetic makeup purely for profit. And when they really, you know, if they say they want to be protecting the salmon, they should be using their money and resources to give to indigenous people because they already know how to protect the salmon. They are their voice for it, and they've been doing that for years. Okay, next slide, please.
Cool. Thank you all for watching and joining. I hope that was a helpful a helpful introduction. And yeah, now I will be sharing my screen for a PowerPoint presentation. Let me get that started. Is everybody able to see this and hear me? Is everyone able to hear me? Should I start? Oh,
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep.
We were all writing yeah in the chat.
oh, I don't see it, sorry. Cool. Cool. Well, I guess after seeing that presentation done by Lehua and Yasmin, I wanted to take a few minutes to do some reflections and share back. So yeah, so what is coming up for you and how can you imagine this becoming a global issue? Yeah, for example, Aqua Bounty has a plan to expand new farms in occupied Palestine. So if anyone else wants to unmute themselves and share some reflections on the presentation and maybe their thoughts on how this could become a global issue or how it already is a global issue. Yeah, I'll give y'all a second.
I don't know. I don't think attendees have the ability to use their microphone because this is a webinar setup. So maybe the chat box and the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen would be useful.
Cool. Yeah, go for it. I can read out what's in the chat box. If anyone wants to put in the chat box their reflections, or if anyone who could speak, maybe one of the panelists wants to share their reflections. So yeah, I can just read Darcy put in the chat. Yeah, once they modify salmon, what else will they modify? I can see issues similar to what's happening with Monsanto seeds and the genetic modification of everything. Yeah, totally. Any other reflections? Sorry, it's hard to see the chat when I'm sharing screen for some reason. But yeah, I guess we'll move on if no one has any. Oh, yeah, fish. Michael says fish aren't going to observe political boundaries. So as soon as GE fish gets into the wild, it's going to be a global issue. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank y'all for sharing. Gonna move on. So yeah, just wanted to look at who our targets are for this campaign. So first we have Aqua Bounty, and they're the company planning on releasing Aqua Advantage salmons. It's what they call their GE Salmon. And then also Sea Grants, which are institutions ideologically supporting GE Salmon and industrial commercial offshore aquaculture, and contributing to the erasure of indigenous the big food service companies that we anticipate will be a big market for Aqua Bounty's GE Salmon. So yeah, feel free to join us in this digital action, tag the company with a post. We have their Instagram and Facebook accounts listed here. and some hashtags that you can use when you make your posts. And yeah, before we move forward, I actually wanted to see if everyone would be down to look up our Instagram account. It's at Block Corporate Salmon on Instagram, and start following us. And yeah, that will ensure that y'all can keep up with what's going on. Let me try to put it in the chat. Or if someone else could in the chat, it's like for some reason.
I just threw it in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you. Cool. And then what's at stake? So Aqua Bounty is moving forward with the release of GE Salmon despite a lawsuit by the Quinault Nation and a coalition of organizations still being decided by the courts. So in many ways, it seems like the lawsuit verdict will be known once Aqua Bounty already releases the salmon, making it harder for us to stop it. So I'm gonna play a video that shows the issue and context of all the recent organizing around block corporate salmon. Cool. Sorry, I'm gonna refresh the presentation. Give me a second. Cool. Aqua Bounty says that there are absolutely no risk that their GE salmon will ever meet wild or hatchery salmon because their innovation consists of land-based fish farms. They say that it's sustainable to grow food in this way, and that this will help climate change. When the CEO of Aqua Bounty, Sylvia Wolf, was told by us on a recent webinar they did with the Cornell Alliance for Science, we asked her if she has consulted with any indigenous people, and especially salmon people. And her answer was at first, who? And then when that was clarified, she said, I don't know what the consultation will be about. The problem with this is that we simply can't trust them and that the stakes are too high. If they ever decided to sell their GE salmon eggs to other aquaculture companies that did both land-based and water or ocean-based fish farming, those GE salmon could escape and mix with naturally occurring salmon, in which case Aqua Bounty could claim to own them because they have patented the gene. Cool. So last is what's at stake. Right now are a lot of white men that claim to know a lot about fisheries and sustainability and work for the government or corporations that are claiming to be pioneering a new wave of both biotechnology and expanding massively the US aquaculture and mass fishing industries for the sake of competing more aggressively in the seafood industry worldwide. All this has really nationalistic and colonial approaches that are really scary right now as white supremacy is rising everywhere. So I wanted to kind of close out with doing an activity. Points of intervention. So we are looking at comprehensive strategy for this campaign and to make this boycott successful globally. We might not be able to physically stop the release of GE salmon when it comes out in a couple of weeks, but we can make it impossible for their business to succeed. For this, we are using a framework from the Center for Story-Based Strategy. What makes this a campaign is that we are going to try to get them from all angles. So the framework that we use is production, so where it's being produced, and they just confirm that their next farm is going to be in Kentucky. Consumption, where it's being consumed. Destruction, what is being destroyed by this. And decision, where are decisions getting made? And then finally, assumption. What do people need to believe, if possible or inevitable, for all of this to be allowed to happen by the general public? So as an activity, I wanted to ask y'all if, from your point of reference, you could take a moment to pull out a paper and pen and draw an escalating curve on it. So like this one right here. And put down all the tactics, strategies, and approaches you think we can take during the rest of the day to escalate, expand the boycott, and stop GE salmon from becoming widespread. So yeah, let me put in the chat the instructions for folks and give y'all a second to do that. So yeah, I put the instructions in the chat, but if y'all can just take a second to find a piece of paper and a pencil and draw a escalation timeline similar to this and kind of just put in tactics and strategies you think that we can take to escalate throughout the rest of the year and stop GE salmon from becoming widespread. And I might give y'all like, 5 to 10 minutes to do that, and then we could do some share backs. And then please let me know if anyone has any questions about this activity. Cool. How is everyone doing with this activity? Does anyone want to, maybe one of the panelists, since the attendees can't really show their cameras, but does anyone want to show how their escalation timeline went, or does anyone need a few more minutes? Also, feel free to put in the chat kind of like some rough ideas that you put on your timeline if you can't share your camera. cool. So Michael put in the chat early on the timeline for consumption, maybe develop a comprehensive guide that identifies all of the sorry, I can't say that word, obfuscating GE labeling in one place. Okay, cool. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else want to share? Okay, I guess we could close up this activity. Thank you all for participating. Yeah, so just want to close off by letting y'all know how to join the campaign. Feel free to fill out the form at bit.ly/UNROcean, all lowercase. And then, like I mentioned, follow the campaign at Block Corporate Salmon on Instagram, and DM us with any questions or interests that you have. We really need to expand our digital presence now more than ever. So if you're an artist, please let us know as well. We could totally use your support. And as for meeting times, we meet every Wednesday from 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific. And we would love to have everyone here join us. So yeah, feel free to do that and let me know if you have any questions right now, or feel free to message the Instagram as well. Does anyone have any immediate questions they would like to put in the chat, or any panelists have any questions before we close up?
I just want to say thank you all so much for sharing with us today. That was a ton of information. I definitely learned a lot. I just want to remind folks, we have about 5 minutes left in our session today for questions and discussion. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature. You can also use the chat. Looks like Darcy's already got a question that you can address. I just want to remind folks before we end today that please be sure to fill out your evaluation form if you're doing the water advocacy certificate, so that we know you attended the session and we can get you all set to go for your certificate. So it looks like there's one question in the chat from Darcy. Can you speak a little bit more about the AQUA or Aqua Act, if you know anything about it? I don't.
Yeah, I don't know if Lehua, would you happen to still be able to speak right now?
Yes, sorry, I'm technically at work. But yeah, so the Aqua Act is a bill that's going through Congress. It's been sort of in and out over and over again, but what it's really about is the commercialization of our oceans. So corporations are trying to get federal waters into, basically this country is trying to have aquaculture be the next new industry that's going to boom in this country. And in order to do that, companies like Aqua Bounty are coming up so that we can develop our own salmon, so we don't have to rely on production coming from Norway. And what the Aqua Act would do is allow these corporations to use federal and public waters in order to have more ocean pens open for more fish farms. So it's just another way that these corporations are trying to boom this industry with absolutely zero thought on the indigenous communities, on all the detrimental effects that open ocean pens have had on these communities already. what would happen if any of these genetically engineered salmon would happen to crossbreed with the wild salmon that are in the ocean. And with that comes, you know, fish competing with other fish. So the Aqua Act is something that specifically our UNR Boston branch is really taking on right now, since Aqua Bounty is based in Boston. And also there's a lot of folks in that area who are really, really concerned about the Aqua Act. So if anybody is interested in learning more about the Aqua Act or wanting to jump on to really help fight against that, you can contact Block Corporate Salmon and come on and be part of our campaign. We can put you in contact with the folks who are in Boston as well.
Well, thank you so much, Lehua. Yeah, any other questions?
Oh, sorry, I did want to add one more thing before somebody comes in, is once you have the commercialization of the ocean and the privatization of the ocean, that is something that Aqua Bounty is already hopping into, because they have patented their Aqua Advantage genetically engineered salmon. So that's another thing too, right? So this salmon is part of Aqua Bounty's property. If for any reason that salmon went to crossbreed with any other salmons in the ocean, or as they continue to branch out into ocean pens, then they are going to start claiming salmon, maybe all wild salmon, as it, you know, starts to snowball into effect, as being part of their own property. So that's something that we're really looking at closely, because that is absolutely insane to think about. But exactly what these people want to do, as they just try to privatize all land, all food, all oceans. So yeah, I just wanted to add that little bit in.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lehua. I guess I'll just leave a couple minutes for any other questions. Feel free to put in the chat, or
we have a question from Regina in the Q&A. Regina writes, are you all following the pragmatic planning for fish farming in California? Are other Pacific states doing that? Is salmon farming in the ocean still illegal in California and Oregon?
do you know the answer to that, Lehua?
Hey, so we are following it. I think Yasmin is more an expert on this than I am. We know that what a lot happens in Oregon is that they have banned some specific salmon farming, but instead what they're doing is that they're not going to be farming salmon in those oceans, since it's not a native fish. What they're going to be doing is, or Atlantic salmon specifically, but what they're going to be doing is farming other types of fish that are native to those waters. So right now, what we are like trying to do is keep track of all of that. Okay, awesome, thank you, Tom. So Tom is saying salmon farming in California is still illegal in ocean waters. And so we're really trying to make sure we stay on top of all these corporations and like their little sneaky ways that they're going to be trying to do this. And yeah, if the Aqua Act passes, then that's something that that is just going to have everything come tumbling down.
Great, thank you all so much. I want to remind everybody in the audience now that in the chat, you can find the Instagram handle for Block Corporate Salmon. You can find the link for the petition. So if you could sign that today, that would be great. And there's also a link to Uprooted and Rising's website, / Block Corporate Salmon. So you can read more about their work there and stay up to date on all of the important work that they are doing. I want to thank you all so much. That was terrific. We now have a 15-minute break in our schedule for today. And so everybody can let their eyes rest for a few moments, stretch, grab some water. We will reconvene for the rest of our conference at 1:45. There will be 2 different sessions happening that you can choose from. There will be another workshop called Our Ancestors Were Scientists, and We Are Too, supporting Indigenous youth to protect our waters. There will also be a session at 1:45 titled Indigenous Knowledge is Not a Backup Plan. And this will have a variety of different paper presentations. And so enjoy your break. We'll see you guys in 15 minutes at 1:45. Have a good one.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.